"Get your cheap coat out of my foyer, you stain on this family's bloodline," my father roared, his voice echoing off the imported Italian marble walls of our ancestral estate. The heavy oak front doors had just been thrown open to the freezing winter night. My family stood behind him, laughing at the pathetic spectacle of my eviction. They thought they were discarding a failed, uneducated dropout who was going nowhere in life. They had no idea that the silent daughter they were throwing onto the driveway had just orchestrated the hostile takeover of their $850 million commercial real estate portfolio. So I looked at them, adjusted the collar of my trench coat, and gave them a slow, chilling smile. I did not shed a single tear, I did not raise my voice or beg for mercy, I simply said, "Okay, fine," and walked out into the cold darkness without ever looking back. What they failed to realize was that my quiet exit was merely the final calculated step before I legally seized every single asset they had ever claimed to own. Let me tell you how I dismantled the monsters who raised me piece by piece, dollar by dollar. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below, and remember, silence is never a sign of weakness. It is the calm before the total destruction of your enemies. The opulent crystal chandelier hanging above the grand dining room cast a harsh, unforgiving light on the people who shared my DNA. We were supposed to be celebrating the 40th anniversary of Vance Commercial Real Estate, my father Richard's supposedly untouchable empire. It was an event meant to showcase our family's supreme dominance over the city's political and financial landscapes. My father was a man who worshipped his own reflection. As an influential real estate tycoon and a sitting city councilman, he spent his life crafting a flawless, untouchable public image. He demanded perfection from his children, and in his eyes I was the ultimate failure. 6 years ago I had walked away from my prestigious Ivy League MBA program. To a family obsessed with legacy and old money pretending, my decision to leave academia to build a boutique forensic accounting algorithm was treated like high treason. They labeled me a disgrace, a stubborn idiot who was throwing away her only chance at relevance. They never once bothered to ask what happened to my software. If they had spent even 10 seconds looking past their own suffocating arrogance, they would have known that my algorithm was recently acquired by a global defense contractor for a staggering $1.2 billion, but I kept my mouth shut. I let them believe I was struggling because a predator never announces its presence before the trap snaps shut. I stood near the edge of the long mahogany dining table, keeping my posture straight. The air was thick with the suffocating scent of roasted duck, expensive truffle oil, and my mother's overpowering Chanel perfume. My older brother Julian sat at the head of the table like a spoiled, incompetent prince. Julian was the executive vice president of my father's firm, a title he had acquired through nepotism. In reality, he had driven 3 major commercial development projects straight into the ground, bleeding millions of dollars in capital because he cared more about playing golf with billionaires than reviewing standard balance sheets. Yet he wore a custom-tailored Tom Ford suit and smirked at me over the rim of his crystal wineglass, playing the role of the flawless golden boy. Beside him sat his wife, Victoria. Victoria was a woman whose personality was built around enforcing her perceived social superiority. She ran a high-end luxury interior design firm that was essentially a multi-million-dollar vanity project funded by my father's company. She loved weaponizing her status against me, treating me like I was an infectious disease that had somehow wandered into her pristine. Victoria leaned back in her plush velvet chair, swirling a glass of deep red vintage Bordeaux. She looked me up and down with an expression of unadulterated disgust. "Honestly, Alara," Victoria said, her voice dripping with fake condescending pity, "it physically hurts my eyes to look at you. You are wearing a clearance rack coat to a black tie anniversary dinner. You are dragging down the aesthetic of the evening just by breathing the same air as us. Julian and Richard work hard to maintain our elite status, and you insist on parading your miserable, poverty-stricken lifestyle in front of our distinguished guests." The blatant, vicious insult hung heavy in the stifling air of the dining room. But no one rushed to my defense. Instead, my mother Eleanor stepped forward. Eleanor was the chairperson of the Metropolitan Arts Foundation, a woman who cared more about securing her name on museum plaques than she cared about her own daughter. She smoothed the silk fabric of her designer evening gown and glared at me with cold, dead eyes. "Victoria is correct," my mother hissed, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "You are an embarrassment to this bloodline, Alara. I spent half my time at the charity galas fabricating elaborate lies about where you are and what you do for a living just to save face. Do not ever show up to our family events again. I cannot have the city's elite knowing my own daughter is a pathetic, Struggling dropout while Julian is out here commanding commercial real estate deals and carrying our legacy forward. I looked slowly at the three of them, absorbing every single toxic word. My father was red in the face, furiously pointing a thick, heavy finger toward the grand entryway. My mother was sneering at me like I was garbage, and my brother sat there with his entitled, arrogant wife, genuinely believing they were the peak of human excellence. They honestly believed I was desperate, broke, and crawling back to the estate to beg for a financial handout. They believed they held every single card in the deck. Okay, fine, I said, was steady, chillingly calm and devoid of emotion. I did not raise my tone or shed a single pathetic tear. I just looked my father dead in his furious eyes and gave him a polite, dismissive smile. Thank you for the wonderful dinner. I turned on my heel and walked out the towering double doors, stepping right past the insults they continued to hurl at my back. I walked down the illuminated, sweeping driveway, leaving the toxic, suffocating mansion behind me forever. As soon as the heavy iron gates of the estate clicked shut, shielding me from their arrogant view, my posture shifted. The polite, quiet daughter vanished instantly, replaced by the apex predator I had truly become. Waiting for me under the dim amber glow of the street lamp was a sleek, armored black Maybach. My private security detail stepped out immediately, opening the heavy rear door with professional precision. I slid into the plush, pristine leather seat, letting the total quiet luxury of the vehicle envelop me. I pulled out my secure encrypted phone and dialed the private direct line of Silas. Silas was not just a terrifyingly brilliant corporate attorney, he was the executive director of my private shadow asset management firm, Ironclad Acquisitions. He answered on the very first ring, his voice crisp and strictly professional. Are we initiating the final protocol, Alara? He asked. I stared out the tinted bulletproof window as the Maybach glided past the high-security walls of my parents' exclusive neighborhood. The cold fury I had carefully suppressed in that dining room now fueled the destruction I was about to unleash. Initiate the hostile corporate takeover immediately, I told him, my voice as sharp and cold as shattered glass. Buy up every single piece of toxic high-yield debt Richard and Julian have secretly accumulated over the last decade. I want the commercial skyscrapers, I want the holding companies, I want the political funds, and I want the ancestral estate. I want everything. Consider it done, Madam CEO, Silas replied without a single moment of hesitation. They thought they were kicking out a worthless failure. They had no idea they had just handed the keys to their kingdom directly to their worst nightmare. The powerful engine of the Maybach purred quietly as we merged onto the desolate midnight highway, leaving their pathetic illusions behind. I opened my high-tech laptop in the back seat, pulling up the financial dossiers Silas had been preparing for months. My family loved to brag about their legacy and their untouchable generational wealth. But the complex red spreadsheets illuminating my screen told the devastating hidden truth. They were suffocating under a mountain of secret offshore loans and fraudulent commercial mortgages. And I now possessed the limitless liquid capital to buy the very air they breathed. Tomorrow morning the real game would begin, and those arrogant monsters would never see the total annihilation coming. 1 week passed since the night my father threw me out of the estate and declared me a stain on the family bloodline. I did not spend a single minute of those 7 days mourning the loss of a family that never possessed the capacity to love me. Instead, I sat back in the shadows and watched them blindly dig their own graves. The majestic, towering glass walls of Vance Commercial Real Estate hid a rotting, desperate core. My golden boy brother Julian was sitting in the corner executive office that he had never earned, sweating profusely through his imported tailored suit. The large computer monitors in front of him displayed a terrifying sea of negative red numbers. The company's primary operating accounts were practically bone dry. He had been quietly, systematically siphoning millions of dollars in corporate funds for months to prop up the failing, massively in-debt vanity design firm owned by his arrogant wife Victoria. The heavy glass office door suddenly swung open and Victoria marched in without bothering to knock. She slammed her $15,000 limited edition designer handbag onto his polished mahogany desk, loudly complaining that her Italian marble suppliers were officially threatening to halt all shipments due to unpaid invoices. She demanded that Julian authorize another wire transfer immediately. Julian furiously rubbed his temples, his hand shaking slightly as he told her there was nothing left to transfer. He quietly confessed, his voice trembling with sheer panic, that he had already drained the company's emergency reserves. He admitted that if our father found out about the missing millions, the ensuing federal audit would ruin them both. Victoria did not offer a single ounce of comfort or sympathy. Instead, she weaponized her usual toxic tactics, her manicured eyes welled with time, manipulative tears as she viciously accused Julian of failing to provide for her the way a powerful, successful man should. She reminded him that she came from old, established wealth and that if he could not properly fund her elite luxury lifestyle, she would easily find another billionaire who could. She pointed a sharp finger at him, told him to figure it out using the family name, and then turned on her heel and walked out, leaving him drowning in complete suffocating desperation. Julian knew with certainty that he could never go to a traditional regulated commercial bank. A legitimate bank would require a comprehensive forensic audit of the company's books and our father's direct, verified authorization. The glaring embezzlement would be discovered in an instant. He needed quiet money. He needed a ruthless shadow lender who operated in the dark and did not ask tedious regulatory questions. Through his desperate, panicked networking at the elite country club, he caught wind of an exclusive, fiercely private credit fund known for issuing corporate bridge loans with extreme discretion. Ironclad acquisitions, he immediately requested an emergency meeting, unaware that he was walking directly, willingly into my carefully constructed web. I sat in my ultra-modern downtown penthouse, sipping a cup of dark espresso while watching the live, high-definition security feed from the Ironclad Acquisitions primary boardroom. My lead attorney and executive director, Silas, was sitting at the head of the long black marble table. Silas was a master of corporate warfare, sharp, relentless, and fiercely loyal exclusively to me. Julian was ushered into the room looking frantic, sweating lightly but trying to project the unbothered image of a wealthy real estate heir. He puffed out his chest, adjusted his Tom Ford tie, and immediately started name-dropping our father, boasting about the vast untouchable legacy of Vance Commercial Real Estate. Julian threw around inflated revenue projections and falsely promised that the loan he was requesting was just a temporary bridge for a minor, lucrative expansion project. Silas let him talk, keeping his expression flat and unreadable. When Julian finally ran out of breath and stopped pathetic bragging, Silas slid a thick, intimidating stack of legal documents across the polished marble table. $7 million, the exact amount Julian had requested to cover Victoria's debts and replenish the stolen corporate funds. Julian reached for the gold pen, but Silas placed a firm, immovable hand over the paperwork. He stated the terms clearly and coldly, letting his voice echo in the large boardroom. Ironclad Acquisitions required undeniable security for a shadow loan of this magnitude. They would not accept the standard commercial skyscrapers or the upcoming development plots as collateral, because the commercial market was currently too volatile. Silas demanded something permanent. He demanded the family's sprawling ancestral estate and the prime, lucrative real estate sitting directly underneath my father's primary political headquarters. Julian froze instantly, the color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly pale. He knew with certainty that putting the family estate and the political headquarters up as collateral was a unforgivable betrayal. If he defaulted on this loan, he would legally leave our arrogant parents homeless and permanently destroy the political sanctuary our father used to rule the city council. He started to stammer, his voice cracking as he tried to negotiate for different, less fatal terms. Silas simply pulled the thick legal documents back toward himself, his expression turning to stone. He coldly told Julian the offer was strictly non-negotiable and would permanently expire the exact moment he walked out of the boardroom. He sharply reminded Julian that shadow funds do not wait for permission, and they certainly do not beg for business. Right at that exact terrifying moment, Julian's phone buzzed on the marble table. It was a vicious text from Victoria, blatantly threatening to humiliate him in front of their elite social circle and file for a messy public divorce if her boutique accounts were not fully funded by the end of the day. The suffocating pressure of maintaining his golden boy image shattered whatever tiny, pathetic shred of loyalty he had left for our parents. Julian grabbed the heavy gold pen. He did not read the dense fine print. He did not ask for his own corporate lawyers to review the devastating terms. He simply signed his own name rapidly on the very first line. Then his trembling hand hovered over the second line, which strictly required the signature of the primary property owner. With visibly shaking fingers, my brother forged our father's signature onto the dotted line. In a matter of seconds, he legally signed away the very roof over our parents' heads and the sacred ground they used to command the city. Silas collected the paperwork, meticulously checking the forged signatures. He gave Julian a tight, professional smile and informed him that the $7 million would be wired directly to his specified accounts within the hour. Julian let out a shuddering sigh of relief. He stood up abruptly, smoothed down his expensive jacket, and walked out of the boardroom feeling like an genius who had just saved his own skin from the fire. He had no idea that the steel trap had just snapped shut permanently around his ankles. In my penthouse, my secure encrypted phone lit up with a silent incoming call. I answered it immediately. Silas's calm, victorious voice came clearly through the speaker. He confirmed that we had the verified signatures and the collateral was officially legally ours. I smiled and slowly closed my high laptop. The silent hostile takeover had officially begun, and my toxic family was happily holding the shovel to dig their own grave. My mother Eleanor was a woman who practically breathed social status. To her, the flawless appearance of generational wealth was far more important than actual oxygen. She built her shallow identity around being the flawless, untouchable matriarch of a prominent, historically wealthy family. But maintaining such lavish appearances cost amounts of liquid cash, and the secret catastrophic financial hemorrhage caused by Julian and Victoria was finally, painfully trickling down to her daily extravagant allowances. Her limitless platinum credit cards were suddenly being humiliatingly declined at her favorite high-end designer boutiques across the city. She had tried to purchase a custom-fitted haute couture gown for an upcoming exclusive charity gala, only to have the digital terminal reject her transaction 3 separate times. My father had sharply told her there was just a minor insignificant clerical error at the primary bank. But my mother was not stupid when it came to preserving her own pristine skin. She knew the family cash flow was drying up. She had seen the raw, panicked look in my father's eyes late at night when he locked himself in his study. She simply refused to ever admit it out loud. Instead of directly confronting my father, she decided to take matters into her own manicured, desperate hands. She needed liquid cash to maintain her weekly country club lunches and her publicized charity donations. She could never ever let the other wealthy, judgmental wives suspect that the prestigious Vance family was struggling to pay for basic, everyday luxuries. The resulting high society gossip alone would destroy her fragile mind. So she quietly and packed up the most prized possession she had ever owned, the vintage sapphire and diamond heirloom necklace with its matching chandelier earrings. The historic pieces had been in our family for 4 proud generations. They were the ultimate symbol of our elite lineage, and she used to parade them around at galas as undeniable physical proof of our superior status. My mother slipped quietly out of the mansion on a early Tuesday morning, wearing an oversized designer hat and dark sunglasses to hide her recognizable face. She drove her sleek Mercedes directly to the most exclusive, secretive private jeweler in the wealthy financial district. This was not a standard brightly lit pawn shop on a street corner. This was a discreet, secure underground vault where old money billionaires went to quietly liquidate their assets without making the evening news. The pristine establishment only dealt with high-net-worth individuals who needed temporary discretion. She walked into the pristine marble lobby, expecting ultimate privacy and immediate royal treatment. She demanded to see the head appraiser immediately, rudely refusing to speak to the junior staff. She placed the heavy velvet box forcefully onto the glass counter and began explaining, with a fake, high-pitched laugh, that she simply wanted to temporarily loan the historic pieces to the vault for safekeeping while they traveled through Europe. It was a thinly veiled, pathetic lie designed to cover up the humiliating fact that she was basically pawning her family legacies just to keep up a fake rich lifestyle. She spoke with her usual arrogant, condescending tone, demanding preferential treatment and a premium valuation based on her prestigious family name. She was desperate. She needed the money to fully fund the publicized charity gala she was hosting this weekend. If she abruptly canceled the gala, the vicious rumors of their financial ruin would spread through the city like wildfire. She took a deep, trembling breath and reached for the pen to sign the humiliating pawn agreement. She was literally selling our family history to buy fake, hollow smiles from people who did not even care if she lived or died. I stepped forward before the gold pen could even touch the paper. I looked directly at the head appraiser. "I will buy the set outright," I said, my voice cutting clearly and authoritatively through the quiet room. "I will pay the full $1 million valuation in cash right now." My mother froze, paralyzed by my words. She turned her head slowly to look at me as if I had just grown a second head. She let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sounded desperate and shrill. "You do not even have $500, let alone $1 million, she sneered, her voice dripping with disbelief. "Stop embarrassing yourself and get out of here before I have security throw you out." "You are making a fool of yourself, Alara." I did not say a single word in response. I simply opened my small designer clutch and pulled out my solid black American Express Centurion card. I placed it gently onto the glass counter right next to her trembling hand. The heavy metal card made a soft, distinct clinking sound that seemed to echo through the room like thunder. The head appraiser immediately recognized the hyper-exclusive invitation-only card. His demeanor shifted from polite to respectful. He took the metal card without a single moment of hesitation and began processing the transaction. My mother stopped breathing. Her eyes were locked onto the black metal card sitting on the digital terminal. She watched in terrifying silence as the machine approved a $1 million purchase in less than 5 seconds. The appraiser respectfully handed me the long receipt to sign and carefully placed the sapphire heirlooms into a secure, elegant travel case. He handed the beautiful bag directly to me and bowed his head slightly, thanking me for my generous business. My mother was paralyzed. The arrogant smirk had vanished from her face, leaving behind a look of sheer, unadulterated shock. Her hands shook as she stared blankly at the woman she had called uneducated trash just days ago. She simply could not comprehend how the daughter she had thrown out onto the driveway was now effortlessly dropping $1 million on a random Tuesday morning without blinking an eye. Her fake reality was fracturing in real time. I picked up the secure bag containing the sapphires and turned to face her. I gave her the exact same condescending, arrogant smile she had given me my miserable life. "Thanks for holding on to my jewelry, Mom," I said, my voice soft but deadly. I turned and walked out of the elite jeweler, leaving her standing there frozen, her mouth slightly open, as the heavy glass doors closed firmly behind me. The bright, unforgiving midday sun beat down on the manicured emerald green lawns of the elite Rosewood Country Club, where my sister-in-law Victoria was hosting her lavish monthly champagne brunch. She had arrogantly rented out the most exclusive, coveted private terrace overlooking the 18th hole exclusively for her tight circle of wealthy, judgmental friends. These were superficial women who meticulously measured a person's human worth by their exclusive zip code, the size of their diamond rings, and the high-end designer labels draped across their narrow shoulders. Victoria thrived in this toxic, superficial environment. She lived for being the center of attention, spending the sun-drenched afternoon spinning elaborate fictions about her struggling interior design firm as if it were the next global lifestyle empire. Silver-tiered trays loaded with imported beluga caviar, delicate French pastries, and rare artisan teas covered the long, pristine white table. Heavy chilled bottles of rare vintage champagne were being efficiently popped open by the attentive, uniformed staff every 15 minutes to keep the crystal flutes overflowing full. Victoria laughed loudly, tossing her styled expensive blonde hair over her shoulder while she bragged to her friends about a fabricated upcoming trip to Milan. She confidently claimed she was flying out on a private jet to exclusively secure new artisan marble manufacturers for her rapidly growing boutique firm. She successfully painted a flawless, convincing picture of financial dominance, ignoring the terrifying, bitter reality that her husband had just secretly mortgaged his parents' ancestral estate, simply to keep her vanity project barely afloat. The expensive afternoon dragged on in a dizzying blur of hollow compliments, fake smiles, and subtle, passive-aggressive boasting. Victoria soaked up the endless unearned validation like a desperate sponge, eager to prove she permanently belonged among the highest tier of the city's elite. She finally signaled the head waiter with a dismissive, arrogant flick of her thin wrist, fully ready to wrap up the extravagant display of fake wealth. The well-dressed waiter approached quietly and placed the sleek black leather-bound checkbook gently, respectfully onto the table. The total came out to just over $15,000 for a few hours of tiny finger sandwiches and imported champagne. Victoria did not even bother looking at the itemized receipt. She pulled the heavy metal corporate credit card, the one belonging to my father's real estate firm, from her designer purse and tossed it carelessly, almost contemptuously, onto the silver tray. She went right back to telling a long-winded fabricated story about her upcoming luxurious summer plans, casually waving her hand as the waiter walked away to process the payment. In her delusional mind, my father's commercial real estate company was a limitless, bottomless piggy bank, existing solely to endlessly fund her extravagant lifestyle and effortlessly impress her shallow, toxic social circle. She fully expected the waiter to return quickly with an expensive mint, a long receipt, and a polite smile thanking her for her generous patronage. Instead, the waiter slowly returned a full 7 minutes later, looking nervous, his face pale. He stood slightly behind her chair, holding the heavy leather checkbook tightly against his chest. He leaned down and whispered softly, trying to preserve her fragile dignity in front of her high society guests. He politely informed her that the digital terminal had rejected the transaction and respectfully asked if she perhaps had another form of premium payment. Victoria stopped talking mid-sentence. The polite fake smile vanished from her face and was instantly replaced by a deep indignant scowl. She looked at the young waiter as if he had just maliciously tracked heavy mud across a pristine, white silk carpet. She raised her voice intentionally, making sure all her wealthy friends could clearly hear the humiliating exchange. She told him his machine must be broken because she was handing him a premium corporate account with an limitless balance. She snatched her heavy purse, pulled out a second premium metal card tied to a different business account, and threw it forcefully onto the tray. She angrily told him to try again and to strictly stop wasting her valuable time. The young waiter rushed away, his face burning bright red with deep embarrassment, while Victoria's friends murmured supportive comments about the utter incompetence of service workers these days. Victoria took a long, arrogant sip of her champagne, shaking her head in exaggerated disbelief. But less than 4 minutes later, the general manager of the country club approached the table personally. His face was terrifyingly pale and his posture was stiff. He did not bother whispering this time. He placed both heavy metal cards directly on the table and stated clearly, loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear, that every single card tied to her name and her husband's corporate real estate accounts had been permanently declined by the primary issuer. He respectfully but firmly requested that she provide a personal credit card or immediately wire the funds directly to the club to settle the $15,000 bill. The table fell, dead silent. The constant clinking of crystal glasses stopped. Victoria's friends stared openly at her, their eyes wide with shock and intense quiet judgment. The worst thing that could possibly ever happen to an arrogant woman in her fragile social position was happening right now. In broad daylight, it was total public financial humiliation. Victoria lost her mind. The poised, elegant country club wife instantly vanished, and a vicious, entitled monster rapidly took her place. She stood up, knocking her heavy chair backward against the hard stone patio. She began screaming at the club manager, demanding his full name and loudly threatening to have him fired and blacklisted before sunset. She yelled that she was a prominent member of one of the most powerful families in the city, and they were disrespectfully treating her like a common, pathetic criminal over a miserable $15,000 tab. She snatched her expensive phone from the table and loudly declared she was calling her elite private banking concierge right this exact second to prove how incompetent the club staff truly were. She put the phone on speaker volume, turned it all the way up to maximum, and slammed it forcefully onto the center of the table so her friends and the manager could clearly hear her upcoming, glorious vindication. The phone rang twice before the private bank manager finally answered. Victoria did not even bother saying a polite hello. She launched instantly into a furious, toxic tirade, demanding to know why her limitless corporate cards were being humiliatingly declined at a prestigious country club. She screamed about a glitch in their banking system and demanded they authorize the charge immediately to save her from any further public embarrassment. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. The bank manager slowly cleared his throat, sounding genuinely terrified of the legal implications. He quietly told Victoria there was no glitch in the system. He nervously explained that less than an hour ago, an unyielding legal directive had come through from a superior financial institution. Every single account tied to her husband, her design firm, and the commercial real estate company had been permanently frozen. There was zero liquid cash available anywhere. The assets were locked down tight under an aggressive, hostile debt acquisition order. Victoria stared blankly at the phone, her face rapidly draining of all remaining color. Her friends were whispering among themselves, their judgmental eyes darting away as the heavy, undeniable stench of total bankruptcy filled the crisp patio air. Victoria grabbed the phone, her voice trembling with a potent mixture of deep fear and unadulterated rage. She demanded to know who had the power to freeze a multi-million-dollar real estate empire without any prior warning. She loudly yelled that it was illegal for anyone to touch her husband's accounts. She ordered the bank manager to give her the exact name of the new hostile lien holder who dared to authorize such a devastating asset freeze. The speakerphone crackled slightly in the quiet, tense breeze of the patio. The bank manager rapidly typed something on his keyboard before reading the dense legal documentation out loud. He stated clearly that the debt had been fully legally acquired by ironclad acquisitions, and the immediate total asset freeze was executed manually by the sole owner of the shadow fund. Victoria screamed at him to read the exact name on the primary signature line. The manager took a deep, terrified breath and read the name slowly and clearly. He told her the authorizing signature simply reads Alara Vance. The expensive phone slipped out of Victoria's hand and crashed onto the table. Her knees buckled slightly as the devastating realization hit her like a speeding freight train. The uneducated, worthless trash they had thrown out of the house was now permanently holding the heavy leash to their existence. The anticipated weekend finally arrived, bringing with it the most important high society political event of the year. The Metropolitan Arts Foundation Charity Gala was the undeniable peak of the city's social calendar. It was a room filled with old money politicians, powerful venture capitalists, and greedy elites looking for their next big financial acquisition. My father, Richard, had been banking his political and financial future on this exact, crucial night for months. He was desperate to court new investors and secure a needed cash injection to save his sinking, crumbling commercial real estate empire. He stood confidently near the center of the opulent ballroom wearing an expensive velvet tuxedo, smiling widely and shaking hands with local billionaires. He was blissfully unaware that his company was already legally mine. Beside him stood my mother Eleanor. She was dripping in what appeared to be her famous family sapphires. Only she and I knew they were flawless, expensive cubic zirconia replicas she had rush-ordered after I ruthlessly bought the real historic heirlooms directly out from under her. She smiled tightly in at the cameras, but her eyes darted nervously around the room. And then there was Victoria, my arrogant sister-in-law. Looked sick. She was wearing a stunning designer dress, but her face was pale and her hands shook as she gripped a large glass of dark red wine. She had spent the last 3 agony days living in unadulterated terror after publicly discovering that I was the phantom debt holder who had frozen all her corporate credit cards. She had not even told Julian the devastating truth yet. She was far too cowardly to admit that she had pushed him into legally signing away his parents' home to the very sister they had viciously discarded. Instead, she drank, trying to numb the terrifying reality that her fake rich lifestyle was effectively, permanently over. The grand towering double doors of the ballroom opened and the low, elegant hum of classical music was drowned out by the sudden wave of intense whispers. I confidently stepped directly into the bright light. I did not arrive in cheap clearance rack clothes or a faded, pathetic trench coat. I arrived wearing a breathtaking, custom emerald green haute couture gown that elegantly swept the floor with layers of heavy, expensive silk. The undeniable vintage family sapphire necklace, the exact one my mother had pawned, rested unproudly on my collarbone, complementing the terrifying confidence radiating from my posture. My elite armed security detail waited discreetly in the grand hall while I walked slowly, gracefully down the sweeping grand staircase. Every single camera flashed wildly, every single eye in the room turned toward me. My toxic family stared in utter, paralyzing disbelief. My father's polite fake political smile instantly morphed into a mask of unadulterated rage. He could not comprehend how the daughter he had publicly banished was confidently walking into a $50,000 a plate charity dinner looking like untouchable royalty. Victoria watched me glide gracefully across the room, and something deep inside her fragile, toxic mind snapped. The public humiliation of her declined credit cards and the sheer paralyzing terror of my financial power boiled over into irrational venom. She could not accept that I was the one permanently holding the keys to her future. She needed to tear me down and forcefully put me back in my pathetic place. She needed to publicly humiliate me to regain some twisted sense of fake control over her rapidly crumbling life. Victoria marched directly toward me, holding her crystal glass of dark red wine tightly. As she rapidly closed the distance, she feigned a sudden dramatic stumble. She viciously lunged forward, intentionally thrusting her arm out and splashing the dark red vintage wine directly onto the pristine bodice of my expensive emerald silk gown. The dark liquid splattered across the expensive fabric, leaving a ugly stain right down the front of my beautiful dress. Several wealthy guests gasped loudly, covering their mouths in unadulterated shock. Victoria immediately threw herself backward, pretending to lose her balance. She let out a loud theatrical cry, putting her hands up defensively. "Oh my goodness, I slipped!" She wailed loudly, making sure her fake voice carried to the surrounding VIP tables. "Please do not be so aggressive, Alara. I know you are angry that you do not belong here, but there is no need to push me." Over the next few weeks, I systematically dismantled their entire empire. I exposed my father's embezzlement during the charity gala, trapping Julian with an undeniable hot mic recording where he desperately tried to hire an assassin to eliminate me. With their financial crimes exposed to the federal authorities and the shadow loan officially defaulted, my shadow firm seized all their assets. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut with a sharp, undeniable finality that echoed throughout the Grand Master bedroom. Victoria let out a piercing, unhinged shriek of terror as the two officers physically dragged her toward the bedroom door. She dug her expensive designer heels directly into the plush custom carpet, trying to stop her inevitable exit. She screamed Julian's name over and over, demanding that he fix this, demanding that he call their elite lawyers, demanding that he take the fall. But Julian simply stood in the corner of the room, paralyzed, watching his toxic wife being hauled away in total silence. As the police escorted Victoria down the grand, sweeping marble staircase, the heavy oak front doors of the mansion burst open once again. My mother Eleanor rushed inside. Her hair was disheveled and her makeup was smudged from the panicked, chaotic aftermath of the disastrous charity committee meeting. She had practically flown back to the estate, hoping to find some semblance of order or a hidden financial lifeline. Instead, she walked directly into the worst nightmare of her curated, superficial life. Eleanor froze in the center of the lavish foyer, her eyes wide with sheer terror as she watched the federal authorities physically drag her struggling, screaming daughter-in-law out the front door. Victoria locked eyes with Eleanor for a split second, her face covered in smeared tears and panic, before she was pushed into the back of the waiting police cruiser. The heavy door slammed shut, sealing Victoria's fate. My mother could barely breathe. She turned slowly, her hands trembling as she took in the sight of the industrial moving trucks lined up outside, and the elite property seizure team actively boxing up her prized vintage art collection. Her flawless elite world was collapsing in real time and she was powerless to stop it. "What is happening?" Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking as she stared at the chaotic scene unfolding in her ancestral home. "What are they doing to my house? Why was Victoria just arrested in my foyer?" I walked down the grand marble staircase, my emerald silk gown trailing elegantly behind me. I stopped just a few steps above her, looking down at the woman who had spent my life making me feel worthless. "They are not doing anything to your house, Mother," I said, my voice calm and devoid of any sympathy. "Because this is legally no longer your house, it belongs to Ironclad Acquisitions. And Victoria was just arrested for severe federal wire fraud because your golden boy Julian gladly handed her the keys to the corporate kingdom, and she promptly stole everything." Eleanor stumbled backward, physically clutching the heavy mahogany banister just to keep herself upright. She shook her head, refusing to accept the devastating reality. "No," she gasped out, her voice trembling with denial. "No, Julian would never do that. Julian is brilliant. Julian is a successful executive. You are lying to me, Alara. You orchestrated all of this just to destroy us." "I did not have to orchestrate a single thing," I replied coldly. "I simply gave Julian enough rope and he tied the noose by himself. But if you truly believe your precious perfect son is innocent, perhaps you should listen to what he was willing to do to protect his own pathetic skin." I reached into my tailored tote bag and pulled out a small encrypted digital audio recorder. I had obtained this verified recording earlier in the week through my elite security team's aggressive surveillance of Julian's desperate, panicked phone calls. I pressed the small play button and held the device up so the crisp high-definition audio could clearly echo throughout the grand foyer. The recording was undeniable. It was Julian's frantic, desperate voice speaking to a notorious, dangerous underground fixer known for permanently eliminating corporate problems. Julian was hyperventilating on the tape, offering to pay $500,000 in untraceable crypto to have me permanently silenced before the shadow loan defaulted. He explicitly detailed my daily routine, the exact make of my armored Maybach, and the specific location of my private downtown penthouse. He was explicitly trying to hire a hitman to murder his own sister just to cover up his illegal financial incompetence. Eleanor stared blankly at the small digital device in my hand. The damning audio shattered whatever tiny fragile illusion she still held about her perfect, golden family. Her precious son, the boy she had arrogantly praised as the ultimate peak of elite society, had explicitly tried to orchestrate the murder of her own daughter over a mismanaged commercial real estate loan. The recording clicked off, leaving a suffocating, heavy silence in the grand foyer, broken only by the loud, aggressive sound of packing tape being ruthlessly ripped by the property seizure team in the adjacent formal dining room. Eleanor slowly sank to her knees right there on the cold, imported marble floor. She buried her pale face in her trembling hands and began to sob. It was not a curated, delicate cry designed to elegantly elicit elite sympathy. It was a guttural, broken wail of complete devastation. She had spent her arrogant life prioritizing superficial wealth, fake social status, and toxic elite appearances over everything else, and it had ultimately permanently left her with nothing but total burning ash. You have 1 hour to pack whatever personal clothing you can physically carry, I told her, my voice devoid of any emotion. The heavy furniture, the expensive art, and the vintage jewelry are all legally classified as seized corporate collateral. If you attempt to illegally take a single tiny valuable item from this estate, I will personally ensure the federal police gladly escort you directly into the exact same holding cell as Victoria. I did not wait for her pathetic sobbing response. I turned and confidently walked back out the grand front doors, stepping out into the bright, crisp afternoon sunlight. My lat driver respectfully opened the heavy armored door of the Maybach and I slid comfortably into the plush leather seat. The hostile corporate takeover was finally complete. I had seized their commercial skyscrapers, I had legally taken their prestigious political headquarters, and I had permanently evicted them from their ancestral family estate. The toxic, arrogant monsters who had kicked me out into the freezing winter night were now homeless, bankrupt, and facing severe aggressive federal prison sentences. But the complete revenge was not finished just yet. There was still the satisfying matter of what I planned to do with the valuable assets I had just successfully, legally conquered. 3 months passed since the publicized devastating eviction that shattered the Vance family legacy. The local media had feasted on the unprecedented corporate scandal. My father's prominent political career was permanently ruined. He was forced to resign in complete disgrace from the city council just hours before his official criminal indictment was handed down by the federal prosecutors. The scandalous revelation that a respected community leader had actively attempted to embezzle over $10 million from an international children's charity was a devastating blow to the city's political elite. Julian, stripped of his unearned wealth and fake power, found himself facing severe federal charges for the corporate embezzlement and the desperate, illegal hitman conspiracy. With the damning audio recording in the hands of the authorities, his expensive defense attorneys quickly abandoned ship, correctly realizing it was an unwinnable case. And Victoria, stripped of her platinum credit cards and her luxury design brand, was currently awaiting trial in a bleak, guarded federal detention center, trying to negotiate a plea deal by throwing Julian under the legal bus. As they viciously fought their miserable legal battles in complete disgrace, I was busy rewriting the future of their former empire. The sprawling, gated ancestral estate that my parents had used for decades to haughtily showcase their fake superiority had undergone a complete transformation. I did not sell the property to another arrogant billionaire or let it crumble into historical dust. Instead, I poured significant capital into gutting the opulent, superficial interior. The pretentious ballroom where my father had viciously kicked me out was now a modern, sleek collaborative workspace filled with state-of-the-art technology and brilliant, ambitious minds. I successfully transformed the sprawling estate into the global headquarters for the Aegis Innovation Hub, a premier-funded fintech incubator specifically dedicated to supporting female entrepreneurs and visionary founders who lacked access to traditional, exclusive venture capital. Where my toxic family had bred only arrogance and corruption, I planted the seeds for genuine, ethical, and massively profitable innovation. The grand opening of the Aegis Innovation Hub was the social and financial event of the season. The exact same elite local media who had viciously gossiped about my eviction years ago were now lining up to cover my incredible success. The pristine driveway, once lined with my mother's pretentious charity friends, was now filled with brilliant tech founders, global venture capitalists, and eager international investors. I stood confidently on the newly constructed modern balcony overlooking the bustling estate. I wore a tailored, razor-sharp black blazer and looked out over the incredible empire I had built from the ashes of my abusers. Silas stood quietly beside me, holding a sleek digital tablet displaying the lucrative returns of our newly acquired commercial portfolio. Ironclad Acquisitions had effortlessly absorbed my father's crumbling real estate firm, expertly restructuring the toxic debt and turning a profitable quarter in record time. The final boardroom meeting is scheduled for noon, Alara, Silas said, his voice carrying its usual calm, professional tone. The remaining senior board members from your father's former holding company have arrived, and they are anxiously awaiting your direct address. They still believe they hold significant voting power. I gave a slow, calculated smile, turning away from the beautiful balcony view. Let us go politely inform them how wrong they truly are. The primary executive boardroom on the top floor of the newly rebranded Ironclad Commercial Tower was a imposing space built to intimidate. It was the exact room where my arrogant father and his wealthy corrupt billionaire friends had conspired for decades to manipulate the city's real estate market. The long heavy mahogany table was surrounded by 8 wealthy older men in expensive tailored suits. These were the elite board members who had enabled my father's gross incompetence, happily looking the other way while he systematically drained the corporate accounts, because he padded their own pockets with lucrative, illegal kickbacks. When I pushed open the heavy glass doors and confidently walked into the room, the 8 men immediately stiffened. They looked at me with a potent mixture of deep underlying resentment and severe, terrified apprehension. They were used to dealing with weak, corrupt men they could easily manipulate with bribes and backroom deals. They had no idea how to handle a woman who had just flawlessly orchestrated a multi-million-dollar hostile takeover without breaking a single sweat. I did not sit down. I confidently walked directly to the head of the table, the exact seat my father used to claim, and I rested my hands lightly on the polished wood. The eldest board member, an arrogant venture capitalist named Harrison, cleared his throat loudly. He attempted to take control of the meeting right from the start. "Elara," he began, his voice dripping with condescending fake paternal authority. "We are pleased to see you actively stepping up during this difficult, rather chaotic transition period. Your father's recent legal troubles are unfortunate, of course, but the core board remains committed to stabilizing the primary assets. We have drafted a comprehensive strategic plan that allows you to quietly retain a minor advisory role while we effectively manage the day-to-day operations and restore the company's elite public image." He confidently slid a thick, polished leather folder across the table toward me, expecting me to simply fall in line and accept the pathetic crumbs he was arrogantly tossing my way. I did not even bother opening the folder. I slowly looked at Harrison, my expression cold and unreadable. "You misunderstand the fundamental nature of this meeting, Harrison," I said, my voice effortlessly commanding the room. "I am not here to seek your compromised advice. I am certainly not here to review your pathetic, useless strategic plans, and I am most definitely not here to actively participate in a collaborative corporate transition." The wealthy men exchanged nervous, uncertain glances. Harrison frowned, leaning forward in his plush chair. "Elara, be reasonable. You successfully acquired the defaulted debt, yes, but we still collectively hold a significant 40% of the voting shares. You need our authorized approval to make any major structural changes to the holding company." I gave him a chilling, slow smile. I reached out and gently tapped my manicured finger directly on the leather folder he had just slid toward me. "That was true 48 hours ago," I informed them. "But while you were all busy nervously planning how to effectively manipulate me in this very room, my firm was busy executing aggressive targeted buyouts of your leveraged secondary portfolios. You gentlemen were so focused on protecting your local real estate kickbacks that you failed to notice ironclad acquisitions buying up the toxic margins on your international shipping investments." Harrison's face went terrifyingly pale. He gripped the heavy edge of the mahogany table. "What are you talking about?" His arrogant facade rapidly crumbling. Silas stepped forward and placed 8 crisp, official legal termination notices directly in front of each terrified board member. "I am officially informing you," I said, my voice echoing coldly and powerfully through the silent boardroom, "that Ironclad Acquisitions successfully acquired the controlling interest of this holding company at 9 o'clock this morning. Your precious 40% voting share has been legally diluted to meaningless dust. You no longer have any power here, you no longer have a lucrative seat at this table. And as of this exact moment, every single one of you is officially permanently fired." The deafening silence that followed was satisfying. These wealthy, arrogant men who had spent decades acting like untouchable gods were now speechless. They scrambled to furiously read the crisp legal documents, searching for a hidden loophole that did not exist. I had flawlessly outmaneuvered them on a global scale and they had no defense left. "You cannot possibly do this," one of the younger board members sputtered, sweating through his expensive silk tie. "You are destroying decades of established corporate partnerships." "I am tearing out the rot that has infected this company for decades," I corrected him sharply. "Your illegal kickbacks are officially over, your unearned bonuses are terminated. My private security team is currently waiting directly outside those heavy glass doors to escort you out of my building. Leave your corporate access cards and your expensive company laptops directly on the table." I turned my back on them, dismissing their pathetic, frantic protests. As I walked out of the boardroom, the heavy, satisfying sound of my tailored heels clicking on the polished floor was accompanied by the frantic, terrified scrambling of 8 defeated, arrogant men. My father's corrupt empire was now cleansed. Winter arrived in the city with a biting, unforgiving cold blanketing the towering skyscrapers and busy streets in a thick layer of pristine white snow. It was Christmas Eve, 1 full year since the fateful anniversary dinner where my family had arrogantly thrown me out into the freezing darkness, believing I was nothing but a worthless, pathetic failure. The contrast between that night and tonight could not have been more. I stood on the expansive heated glass balcony of my downtown penthouse wearing a simple but elegant silk robe. The sprawling, glittering skyline of the city stretched out endlessly before me. A significant portion of those brightly lit, towering commercial buildings now legally belonged to ironclad acquisitions. My shadow firm had not only stabilized my father's crumbling real estate empire but had expanded it into an ethical, immensely profitable global portfolio. The Aegis Innovation Hub was thriving, funding dozens of brilliant, ambitious women who were already making waves in the international tech industry. The air inside the penthouse was warm, filled with the soft, comforting scent of expensive pine and the quiet, elegant notes of classical jazz playing gently in the background. I held a crystal glass of exceptionally rare vintage Bordeaux, taking a slow, satisfying sip as I watched the soft snow fall over the illuminated city. I was at peace. There was no toxic screaming, no passive-aggressive insults, no desperate scrambling to maintain a fake, superficial status. There was only undeniable success and the quiet, profound comfort of genuine power. My encrypted cell phone, the sleek marble patio table, vibrated softly. The screen lit up with an unsaved unknown number. I set my crystal wine glass down gently and picked up the device. I knew who it was. I had been expecting this specific pathetic call for weeks. I swiped the screen and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear without saying a single word. For a long, heavy moment there was only the sound of static and desperate, shuddering breaths on the other end of the line. Then my mother's voice broke through the silence. It was unrecognizable from the arrogant, curated matriarch who used to rule the elite country club. It was thin, frail, and dripping with crushing desperation. "Alara," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, please do not hang up." I did not respond. I simply listened to the cold wind howling softly outside my penthouse, waiting for her to finally say the words she had spent her life avoiding. "We have nothing left," she sobbed, the sound pathetic and hollow. The federal prosecutors froze everything. They took Richard's pension. They took Julian's remaining accounts. Victoria testified against us all to secure a reduced sentence, and Julian is facing 20 years in maximum security. Your father and we are staying in a miserable, freezing motel on the edge of the city. We do not even have enough money to buy decent food for Christmas, Alara. The heating unit is broken and it is so cold." She paused, waiting for me to offer a single shred of sympathy, a tiny ounce of familial pity. When I remained silent, she broke down. "Please, Alara," she begged, practically choking on her own bitter tears. "You have so much, you have everything, you are a billionaire, you own our home, you own the company. We are your family, please, just send a car for us, just give us a small apartment, a tiny allowance. Something. We are so sorry, we were so wrong about you, please, just help us." I looked out over the glittering, untouchable empire I had built from the ashes of their arrogant cruelty. I thought about the decades of vicious insults. I thought about the heavy, suffocating pressure to conform to their toxic, superficial standards. I thought about the night they laughed while throwing me out into the snow, confident that I would crawl back, begging for their conditional, fake love. They did not regret abusing me. They did not genuinely regret kicking me out. They only regretted that I had forcefully, legally taken the power away from them. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the crisp winter air fill my lungs. "It physically hurts my eyes to even think about you, Mother," I said, my voice calm, chillingly smooth and devoid of any emotion. "You are dragging down the aesthetic of my evening just by breathing the same air as me." I repeated the exact vicious insult Victoria had thrown at me 1 year ago, the exact same insult my mother had so proudly agreed with. Eleanor let out a sharp, devastated gasp. "Alara, please, Merry Christmas," I said coldly. I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the screen once to end the call, and firmly pressed the button to permanently block the number. I set the phone back down on the cold marble table and picked up my crystal glass of vintage wine. I took another slow sip, turned my back on the glittering city, and walked back inside my warm, quiet penthouse, leaving them in the freezing darkness forever.